February 14th, 1929, 10:29 a.m. Bugs Moran walks toward his own execution and doesn't know it yet. 1 block from the SMC Cartage garage on North Clark Street, he sees a police sedan parked outside. Something tightens in his chest. He turns around, walks away. 60 seconds later, Tommy guns tear through 7 of his men inside that garage, the same garage where his dark wool overcoat still hangs on a hook next to his morning coffee. This wasn't random. 3 months earlier, Moran killed Al Capone's chief enforcer outside a Cicero speakeasy. Capone promised revenge. He got it. The Valentine's Day Massacre would become the most famous gang killing in American history. But the real mystery isn't who did it. It's why Moran was late that morning, and whether being late destroyed him worse than the bullets would have. By late 1928, George "Bugs" Moran controlled the north side of Chicago like it was his personal kingdom. $2 million a year in bootlegging, speakeasies, gambling dens, protection rackets. The press called him Bugs because of his wild reputation, but the people who worked for him knew better. He was calculating, ruthless, and paranoid in exactly the right doses. South of the city, Al Capone ran an even bigger operation. For years, the two gangs operated under an uneasy truce. Business stayed separate. Territory stayed clear. Then, in November 1928, Moran's men ambushed one of Capone's top enforcers outside a club in Cicero. The man died on the sidewalk, 5 bullets in his chest. Newspapers called it execution style. They weren't wrong. What they didn't report was that the dead man wasn't just Capone's enforcer. He was Capone's closest friend. That changed everything. Capone's public statement hit the papers the next day. Nobody walks away from that. In Chicago's underworld, that wasn't a threat. It was arithmetic. Through January and into February 1929, Moran kept his routines despite the danger. Every morning, he met his core crew at the SMC Cartage Company garage at 2122 North Clark Street. He'd arrive at 10:15 a.m., park in back, enter through the side door. First thing he did was hang his dark wool overcoat on the same hook near the radiator, then coffee, then cigars, then planning the day's liquor shipments with 7 trusted men. The Gusenberg brothers, Albert Weinshank, and 4 others whose names would end up in every Chicago newspaper. To the public, Moran was confident, untouchable. Privately, he slept with a loaded gun and checked his mirrors obsessively. He changed cars. He varied his routes home. But the morning meeting? That stayed constant. Routine keeps you alive, he believed. It gives you control when everything else is chaos. That's what he told himself anyway. What he didn't know was that across town, Capone's men had been watching that garage for weeks. They knew his schedule better than his own crew did. They'd counted the men, mapped the exits, noted that Moran always arrived at 10:15, wearing that same overcoat. Late January 1929. Capone was in Miami. Perfect alibi, smart move. But his men in Chicago were already executing the plan. They'd stolen a black Cadillac sedan and dressed it up to look like a police car. 5 sets of police uniforms, 2 Tommy guns. The strategy was brutal but simple. Show up in uniform, convince Moran's men it was a routine shakedown, disarm them, line them against the wall, then execute them all. On February 13th, Moran received a phone call about a major liquor shipment arriving the next morning. He scheduled the garage meeting for 10:30 a.m. Valentine's Day. Something felt off about the call, but he couldn't cancel without looking scared. In Chicago, showing fear was the same as showing weakness, and weakness got you killed faster than stupidity. That night, Moran barely slept. He kept thinking about the dead enforcer in Cicero, about Capone's promise, about how revenge in this city worked like clockwork, inevitable, mechanical, precise. The call about the shipment? It never existed. It was bait, and Moran had already swallowed it. February 14th, 1929, 9:45 a.m. Moran's 7 men arrived at the garage on North Clark. His overcoat already hung on its usual hook. Coffee brewed on the hot plate. The men were relaxed, laughing, talking about Valentine's dates, making jokes. Nobody sensed what was coming. By 10:20 a.m., a black Cadillac sedan pulled up outside, looking exactly like an official police vehicle. 5 men exited wearing crisp Chicago PD uniforms. They walked into the garage with the confidence of cops who'd done this 100 times. Moran's men assumed it was a routine raid. They'd been through it before. You lined up, you got frisked. Maybe you paid a bribe, and everyone went home. So they lined up against the brick wall. Hands visible. No resistance. That's when 2 men in civilian clothes walked in, carrying Thompson submachine guns. The Tommy guns opened up. 70 rounds in less than a minute. The sound was deafening, contained by brick walls, muffled enough that neighbors barely noticed. When the smoke cleared, 7 bodies lay crumpled against the wall. Blood pooled on the concrete. The police walked out calmly, drove away. And Moran? He was running exactly 10 minutes late, same morning, 10:25 a.m. Moran left his apartment with 2 bodyguards. Different accounts tell different stories about why he was late. Some say his girlfriend delayed him. Others claim he received a warning phone call and deliberately stalled. The truth? Moran himself never knew for certain, and that uncertainty would eat at him for the rest of his life. What's verified is this. He walked toward the garage 1 block away and spotted the police sedan parked outside. His gut tightened. Something felt wrong. Chicago cops didn't park directly in front of illegal operations. They stayed subtle, collected their money quietly. This was too visible, too official. Moran turned around, walked into a coffee shop instead, sat by the window. 1 minute later, he heard it, faint, muffled pops that sounded like firecrackers. 60 seconds of noise, then silence. Neighbors rushed outside. Real police cars arrived, sirens screaming. Moran watched from the coffee shop window, his hands shaking around a cup he didn't remember ordering. He knew. Before the cops went inside, before the bodies were identified, before the reporters swarmed, he already knew. If he'd been on time, he would have been body number 8. His usual position was between the Gussenberg brothers. He would have taken the first burst from the Tommy guns. Instead, his overcoat hung on a hook inside, untouched, while his friends bled out on the floor. Survival in Chicago came down to traffic lights and gut feelings. Moran had both that morning. Whether that made him lucky or cursed depended on how you measured the cost of living. That afternoon, real detectives brought Moran to the station for questioning. Reporters mobbed him outside. Flashbulbs exploded in his face. He gave them the quote that would define the massacre forever. Only Capone kills like that. It wasn't speculation. It was statement of fact delivered with the exhausted certainty of a man who just lost 7 friends and knew exactly who was responsible. The St. Valentine's Day massacre hit every newspaper in America by evening. 7 men executed in a garage, lined up like cattle, shot down by men in police uniforms. It was the single most brutal gang killing in U.S. history, and it happened in broad daylight in the middle of Chicago. That night, Police let Moran return to the garage. He needed to see it, needed to understand how close he'd come. The chalk outlines were still there. Blood stained the brick wall in long vertical streaks where bodies had slid down. His coffee sat on the table, stone cold now, and his dark wool overcoat still hung on the hook near the radiator. Moran walked over, touched the fabric, felt the holes, bullet holes, 7 of them. The trajectory matched the victim's perfectly. If he'd been standing in his usual spot, between the Gusenberg brothers, the bullets would have passed through his chest. The coat proved it. Physical evidence that only timing had saved him. He took the coat down, folded it, and walked out. He'd never wear it again, but he'd never throw it away either, because it testified to something he couldn't escape. Capone had sent a message to the entire underworld. You cross the line, you die. Moran had crossed it, and somehow, impossibly, he'd survived. Weeks after the massacre, Moran stopped sleeping through the night. He kept the lights on, changed locations every evening, rotated bodyguards. Every car that slowed down could be Capone's men. Every stranger in a uniform could be the next wave. His empire started crumbling immediately. Distributors were too afraid to meet with him. Rival gangs sensed weakness. Capone's operation expanded while Moran's contracted. The FBI opened an investigation, but witnesses were too terrified to talk. Nobody got prosecuted. Nobody went to trial. The massacre became legend, but justice? That never materialized. Moran started drinking heavily, lost weight, aged a decade in a few months. People who'd known him before said he looked haunted, like he was seeing ghosts in every shadow. Some people believed he'd received a warning call that morning. Others insisted it was pure luck. Moran himself went back and forth. On good days, he called it instinct. On bad days, he wondered if someone had tipped him off deliberately, and if so, why. What debt did he now owe? What trap was he walking into? The uncertainty destroyed him in ways bullets couldn't have. Because here's the thing about Capone's revenge. It wasn't just the massacre. It was everything after. Capone never tried to kill Moran again. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. Moran was broken. His crew was decimated. His reputation was shattered. He'd survived, sure. But he'd lost everything that made survival worthwhile. Living became its own punishment. And Capone? He went back to Miami, untouchable, knowing he'd won without firing a single shot himself. By 1930, rumors started circulating about an inside man. Some claimed one of Moran's lieutenants had called him that morning with a deliberate warning. Others said a rival gang had tipped him off to create a debt they'd collect later. The FBI files, released decades later under Freedom of Information requests, revealed that Capone had a mole inside Moran's crew. Someone feeding information about schedules, routes, security. The fake shipment call had originated from Capone's hotel in Miami. Perfect coordination. The timing was flawless. Moran's men gathered. The trap was set. The only variable nobody could control was Moran's late arrival. Whether that was girlfriend trouble, divine intervention, or a warning call, nobody knows for certain. What's documented is that Moran never found out the truth. He spent years wondering, interrogating his surviving associates, checking phone records, chasing ghosts. The uncertainty ate at him worse than any bullet wound, because if someone had warned him, it meant he owed his life to a person he couldn't identify. And if it was just luck, that meant 7 men died while he lived for no reason at all. No cosmic justice, no grand plan. Just traffic and timing. That kind of randomness breaks a certain type of man. Moran was that type. He'd built his whole identity on control. Controlling territory, controlling men, controlling outcomes. The massacre proved he controlled nothing. One phone call he didn't make. 10 minutes he didn't plan. A police sedan he happened to notice. That's all that separated him from a chalk outline on a garage floor. Through the 1930s and into the 1940s, Moran's empire dissolved completely. He couldn't maintain territory while constantly hiding. Capone went to prison in 1931 for tax evasion, but the damage was already done. Moran's men had scattered, his operations fragmented. The Great Depression hit. Prohibition ended in 1933, eliminating the bootlegging business entirely. Suddenly, the empire Moran had built was worthless. The networks, the connections, the routes, all of it obsolete overnight. He drifted between cities, Detroit, Cleveland, back to Chicago, always looking over his shoulder, always expecting the next attack that never came. Police arrested him multiple times for petty crimes. The man who'd once controlled millions was reduced to small-time theft, robbery, fraud, desperation crimes committed by someone trying to remember what power felt like. In 1940, he was arrested for stealing checks. In 1943, counterfeiting. Each arrest made headlines, but not because of what he'd done, because of what he'd been. Former gang boss arrested for petty crime. The newspapers loved the fall, loved showing how far he'd dropped. Moran's mugshots from this era show a completely different man. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, defeated. The confident bootlegger from 1928 was gone. What remained was a shell who couldn't stop talking about February 14th, 1929. He told the story to anyone who'd listen, cellmates, lawyers, reporters, always the same details. The police sedan, the gut feeling, the overcoat with bullet holes. People stopped listening after a while. The story became a prison joke. Here goes Bugs again with his Valentine's Day tale. But Moran couldn't stop. Because that morning was the only thing that made sense anymore. The massacre didn't kill him. It just took away his reason to live. In the 1950s, Moran's old overcoat became a museum piece. The Chicago History Museum acquired it as evidence of the city's gangland era. Behind glass, the bullet holes told their story. Forensic experts analyzed the trajectory. 7 holes, passing through at chest height, matching the pattern of the victims lined against the wall. The coat proved exactly where Moran would have stood, between the Gusenberg brothers, in the direct line of fire. He would have taken the first burst from the Tommy guns. Death would have been instant. The coat became physical proof that only timing had saved him. Not skill, not planning, not divine favor. Just 10 minutes and a moment of paranoia. Visitors would stare at it, photograph it, imagine the scene. Tour guides would point to the holes. This is where Bugs Moran should have died. The coat testified to something the newspapers missed. Moran wasn't the target. He was just victim number 8 on a list. Capone wanted them all dead. Moran wasn't special, wasn't singled out for special cruelty. He was ordinary, replaceable. And somehow, that realization hurt worse than anything else. In 1946, Moran was arrested for bank robbery in Ohio, sentenced to 10 years. The fall from Northside King to common criminal was complete. In prison, he told his Valentine's Day story obsessively. Every new cellmate heard it, every guard, every visitor. He couldn't let it go. Other inmates started mocking him. Yeah, Bugs. We know. You were late. You lived. Congratulations. But Moran needed to talk about it. needed to make sense of why 7 men died while he walked into a coffee shop. He was released in 1956, 63 years old, broke, alone. No family, no friends, no power. The 7 men who died in 1929 had quick deaths. Moran had a slow one. He'd been dying for 27 years by the time he left prison. Every day since the massacre had been borrowed time, and he'd spent it all wondering if the loan was worth it. Freedom felt hollow. Survival felt pointless. The men who died against that brick wall, they'd at least had a moment of certainty, lined up, guns raised, over. Moran had spent 3 decades in purgatory, waiting for an ending that never came. In 1957, Moran gave an interview to a Chicago crime reporter. He was 64, dying of cancer, and still obsessed with February 14th, 1929. "I should have been there," he said. "Every day I ask why I wasn't." He described nightmares about standing against the wall, hearing the Tommy guns, feeling the bullets that never actually hit him. He revealed that he'd kept a piece of the overcoat for years, just a scrap of fabric with a bullet hole through it. Eventually, he threw it away. Couldn't stand seeing it anymore. Couldn't stand imagining the bullets passing through over and over. Moran died in Leavenworth Prison on February 25, 1957. Cancer took him. His final words, according to the guard who was there, were about the massacre. About the morning he was late. About the men who died while he lived. The newspapers ran obituaries, but they were brief. Former gangster dies in prison. No mention of his empire. No reflection on his power. Just the massacre. That's all anyone remembered. That's all that mattered. From wanting survival, Moran had shifted to wishing for a different kind of death. Not slow, not hollow. Just quick and certain, like his 7 friends got. Today, the SMC Cartage garage is long gone, demolished in 1967. But the brick wall from the massacre was preserved. It's in a museum now. Tourists photograph the bullet holes. Buy replica Tommy guns from the gift shop. Chicago tour guides tell the story the same way every time. 7 men died. Moran was late, he lived, he wished he wasn't. The true version remains uncertain. Luck, warning, divine intervention? Moran took the answer to his grave. What's certain is this: 7 men died in 60 seconds. 1 man died over 28 years, quick versus slow, bullet versus time. Moran's overcoat occasionally appears in traveling exhibits about organized crime. Behind glass, weathered, faded, sacred in its own way. It carries the weight of the question that haunted Moran until his final breath.